Mr. Thompson here. We're looking at U.S. History Standard 10, identified the legal, social, and political dimensions of Reconstruction. In particular, we're looking at Part B of that standard, investigate the efforts of the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, the Freedmen's Bureau, to support poor whites, former slaves, and Native Americans. In March 1865, Congress created the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands to help ease freed slaves' transition from enslavement to freedom. The Bureau is often simply referred to as the Freedmen's Bureau. In addition to supporting former slaves in beginning their new lives, the Bureau was also intended to help the large number of homeless whites who had lost their property or had been displaced after the war. The federal government was operating as a relief agency trying to help the social welfare of the nation's citizens. In addition to assisting with basic needs such as food, shelter, medical assistance, and clothing, the Freedmen's Bureau also worked to introduce a system of free labor, oversee approximately 3,000 schools for freed persons, settle disputes, and enforce contracts typically between their white landowners and the black labor force, and secure justice for blacks in state courts. The Bureau also worked to reunite families and legalize marriages of former slaves. One of the greatest areas of success attributed to the Freedmen's Bureau was that it provided basic education to approximately 200,000 blacks. During slavery, in most southern states, it was illegal to teach slaves to read and write. White Southerners were worried that literate slaves would be able to communicate better, so be able to plan rebellions, or they would also be able to read newspapers from the North talking about abolitionist efforts. Once the Civil War was over, it was essential that former slaves learn basic math and reading skills so that they wouldn't be taken advantage of when negotiating work contracts with white landowners. While the Freedmen's Bureau did help some former slaves acquire land that was unclaimed by its pre-war owners, Congress did not grant land or the absolute right for freed slaves to own land. Such land grants would have provided blacks some economic independence. Without land grants and very little skills outside of farming, this left former slaves with really no other choice than entering the sharecropping, crop lien, or tenant farming system that really reflected similar conditions to slavery, where they were stuck working for former slaveholders. Most of the people helped by the Freedmen's Bureau were black. However, some white Southerners also received ration assistance for food and clothing. There is also some evidence in the Freedmen's Bureau record keeping that they also helped American Indians who drew rations as well. The records document some Cherokee and Creek tribal members receiving some assistance. As in the case of land grants, the Bureau really lacked any enforcement authority of its own and lost the capability to carry out its mission once federal troops withdrew from the South. The lack of adequate funding restricted the number of agents working in the South. A Freedmen's Bureau agent was typically the only Northern government representative in a former Confederate community. The agent was often threatened and harassed. Most white Southerners refused to support the Bureau's objectives, and Northern politicians neglected to give financial support to it, thus causing its demise. The Freedmen's Bureau operation shut down in 1872.